Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, the devastating accounts of rape and sexual violence from victims of Syria's bloody civil war. A group of women courageously speak to our France 24 reporters. Also in the US, disturbing news for the gender pay gap. According to new data, women fell further behind men in earnings for the second year in a row. I'll be talking shortly to financial journalist Josie Cox as to why this is happening. And fans of Mexican artist Frida Kahlo can now learn more about her early life thanks to a museum dedicated to her beginnings in Mexico City. But first, and in 13 years of Syria's civil war, thousands of men, women and children were arrested. Rape and sexual violence were systematically used as weapons of war. These are crimes that remain largely taboo and shrouded in silence. In a painful documentary, some brave women have chosen to share their stories with France 24 journalists Dana Elbaz and Asiya Hamza, and a warning that this report contains descriptions of sexual violence.
The Palestine Security Branch. Its name is synonymous with terror in Damascus. This prison symbolizes the repression of the regime. From 2011 onwards, thousands of Syrians were detained there during the uprising against former President Bashar al-Assad.
إنه هي الكلمة لحالها ما بتروح من بالي إنه لساتها نظيفة، يعني لسه أنا جسمي نظيف. أنت عم تتعرض لاغتصاب موحش موحش موحش. يعني صار من الأمام الخلف. أنا بأثناء الاغتصاب هذا من الخلف صابني إغماء.
With the fall of Bashar al-Assad, many Syrians are dreaming of justice. Across the country, there's hope that the perpetrators of these crimes will now be held accountable. But for Ali Al-Zir, a lawyer at the Damascus bar specializing in transitional justice, the new authorities must first establish a foundation of trust.
وصمة العار المجتمعي بصراحة هي العائق الأكبر عند السيدات بسبب حساسية هذا الموضوع عند المجتمع السوري، فبالتالي بتقول لك ما راح اشتكي لحتى ما اجيب العار سواء لنفسي او حتى لأسرتي او لعائلتي، فبتفضل انه ما تروح باتجاه الادعاء. بقدر ما نكون عم نشتغل حتى نرفع التوعية ونكسر هاي الوصمة الاجتماعية، وصمة العار الاجتماعية ضد النساء المتعرضات لهذا النوع من الانتهاكات، بقدر ما نكون عم نساهم وممكنهم لحتى يكونوا عم يساهموا ويكونوا يروحوا باتجاه رفع دعاوى الإنصاف. فيفترض أن تخصص مواد قانونية تحت هذا المسمى، مسمى العنف الجنسي، ويتم إجراءات خاصة مرتبطة في التحقيق والتقاضي ضمن هذا العنف.
أما إنه اليوم نحكي عن عدالة إنه ما في يتم إشراك فيها الناجين والناجيات وما يتم فيها إنه هو شو شكل العدالة، بلاقي لهم هي محاسبة، جبر الضرر، الاعتراف من الدولة بهاي الجرائم اللي صارت، بالإضافة إنه يكون في مثلا موضوع مثل ما بنقول إنه ضمان عدم تكرار الفعل. وكيف ممكن نضمن عدم تكرار الفعل إذا ما يكون في قوانين تردع؟ اليوم أنا ما فيني مثلا بصراحة إنه أكون أو عم فكر بطريقة إنه أنا ممكن أكون بأمان بسوريا إذا ممكن هذا الفعل يتكرر.
And you can catch that full report on France24.com. Now to the US. Some figures have revealed the gender pay gap between women and men after decades of shrinking is now instead increasing. The pay gap being a metric of how much more money men earn than women. New data released by the US Census Bureau shows that it's widened for the second consecutive year in 2024. Women working full-time earned a median salary equivalent to 81% of what their male counterparts earned. This represents a 2% decline compared with 2023, which itself was already down from the previous year. Joining me now from New York is Josie Cox, a financial journalist and author of Women, Money, Power. Josie, thank you so much for your time. For 50 years or so, the gender pay gap was slowly decreasing, and now we're witnessing a U-turn. So what is actually happening? And you can't simply point the finger, can you, at the Trump administration, since this trend began 2 years ago?
There are really three things that are really important to understand here. Three factors that have been underpinning this gender pay gap for all this time. One is the motherhood penalty. So the extent to which women are still far more likely in this country to take a leave of absence from the paid labour market when they have a baby, to maybe shift careers as well and go into part-time work. The second thing is what economists call occupational segregation. And that's really just a fancy way of saying that women still tend to be overrepresented in jobs that are less well paying, where wage growth is perhaps lower than in other jobs. The final factor, and this one is where it gets interesting, is unconscious bias and conscious bias. So even when women and men hold exactly the same jobs, there is still a tendency for women to get promoted less frequently than men, to get pay rises less frequently than men. Now, all of those three factors have been in place for decades. What's new in the last year or so is that there have been some trends that have really shaped the woman's experience in the paid labour market. And the most important one that I've been looking at recently is return to office mandates. So for a little bit of context, during the pandemic, when a lot of us were working from home, we actually saw a pretty stark increase in women's labour force participation, and particularly among young mothers who were able to balance work and care responsibilities at that time. But in the last few months, in the last year or so, we've seen a lot of mandates for return to office. And as a result of that, we've seen a pretty severe drop in women's labour force participation, again, particularly among mothers who are being forced to shift into work that is perhaps less well paid.
And the pay gap is even larger when you take into account race. Black women making 65 cents and Latinos only 58 cents for every dollar that white men earned last year.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's such a good point to make. We can't really treat women as a sort of monolithic group because, as you say, the lived experience of white women tends to be very different to the lived experience of women of color, of Latinas. Again, this is where occupational segregation comes into the equation. We have an overrepresentation of women of color, of Latina women in the types of jobs that are less secure, where pay raises are not as frequent. What's also interesting to note here is that since the new Trump administration came into office, now, of course, this is not captured in the 2024 data, but since they came into office, we've seen things like severe federal job cuts. And again, the types of people who are affected by those federal job cuts are predominantly women of color, and Latina women as well.
Yet how much is the current climate in the US, which you're just referring to, with, of course, the current administration targeting diversity, equity and inclusion, make it difficult to reverse this trend?
It's really hard to quantify just yet because these executive orders that you're referring to, things like the rolling back of DEI initiatives, they're only quite recent. So we got that big executive order in January. So we'll take a few more months, if not years, to tell exactly what impact it's having. But I do think it is fair to say that we are seeing a lot of organizations being very careful in the extent to which they have initiatives that promote women in the workplace, that promote women of color in the workplace. And I do believe that based on what we know about the labor market, the way that dynamics in organizations work, that really will have a detrimental impact on things like the gender pay gap. And I think that it's fair to say that this trend of widening is probably here to stay, at least for the next few years.
And many thought, didn't they, Josie, that greater pay transparency would help solve the issue, but this appears that it really hasn't worked at all.
The obvious thing to say there is that we've never really had that much pay transparency in the US. When you look at countries like the UK, like parts of Northern Europe, where pay transparency, gender pay gap reporting mandates, and things like that are in effect, we have seen a sort of consistent, if still pretty glacial, closing of the gender pay gap. But in the US, I think we're so far from that. For the time being, transparency is not about to improve. And as a result of that, I think that we are going to have to get used to the trajectory of this gender pay gap not being good news for now.
Josie, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, fans of Mexican artist Frida Kahlo can now learn more about her early life and family in a new museum dedicated to her roots in Mexico City. The museum is housed in the home where she grew up and offers an intimate look at Kahlo and her earliest influences. Catherine Viette has more.
A portrait in an old frame, clothes that belong to a cherished family member. These are items found in homes around the world, and that's what visitors are coming to see at the Red House, the personal and treasured possessions of Frida Kahlo. The museum is located in her parents' old home, and Kahlo's grandniece says she hopes people will gain a greater understanding of the iconic Mexican artist.
What I want the audience to find is the human Frida, Aunt Frida, the Frida they don't know because they know her as a painter, as a strong, fighting woman, an innovative one. But here they'll find that Frida who laughed, who cried, who played the guitar, who told jokes. In other words, the sister Frida, the Aunt Frida.
Visitors can see the family dining room with the table set for an evening meal. Negatives on display, shot by Kahlo's father, who was her mentor and helped instill her love of art. And also her secret refuge, the basement, which she would return to time and again when the outside world or pressures in her marriage to Diego Rivera would become overwhelming.
She went beneath the house to the basement, and that's where she wrote and where she created some of the things and where she listened to music and where she could be herself. So this place is open to the public for the first time.
Among the collection's standout pieces, a pre-Hispanic necklace often worn by Kahlo, as well as many of her favorite outfits of traditional indigenous blouses and skirts. Through the items on display that tell of her close relationship with her parents and especially her sister Cristina, her family hopes visitors will leave with a deeper understanding of Kahlo's life beyond the canvas.
And that's it for this edition. So until our next show, bye for now.